Hello, I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido. Welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings, in which I read things. Way back in the 90s, I was part of a virtual baseball team called the Double-Breasted Fedoras. This was on the Genie online service. This was a bulletin board back in the 90s, back in the days of monochrome monitors and scrolling texts and modems that made horrible noises when you signed in. And we had a sort of virtual baseball team. We even have jerseys, actually. I probably should have dug mine out for this reading, but I didn't. One thing we also did was an online magazine, which was not like what you see these days. It was just sort of a bunch of stories thrown together that you would scroll through on your monochrome monitor as it loaded very slowly. And I ran a story that I had originally written for an anthology called Two-Fisted Writer Tales. It was to be the sequel to Swashbuckling Editor Stories, and while Swashbuckling Editor Stories did happen, Two-Fisted Writer Tales did not. So I had this story. I ran it in Fedoras Literary Review, and then later I got it into another anthology, which was put together by my writers group. Back in 1990, Terry Bisson taught a class at the New School here in New York City, and several of the students who took that writing class decided to stay together and continue to gather every week, even after the class was over, and continue to critique each other's work. That group was called Circles in the Hair, for reasons that are lost to antiquity, or at the very least lost to me. I'm sure there was a good source for the name. It might even be in the book. In 2005, in the nascent days of print-on-demand publishing, we put together Circles in the Hair, in which each of us had our own story. And I decided to run that Two-Fisted Writer Tale story, which was called Editorial Interference. And it was in here, and then I later reprinted it in my short story collection without a license. Again, this story was written in the 1990s, which will be important as we go along, since it, well, you'll see. Anyway, this was a story that was written at a time when I was a junior editor at a book packaging company, which is kind of like being an editor at a publisher. We did all of the publisher things. We did editing work and art direction and stuff like that, and then we put that package together and sell it to a publisher who would then print it and distribute it and market it. So, but I was working as a junior editor at the time, and well, you'll see why that's important as we go. So without further ado, here is Editorial Interference by Keith R.A. DeCandido. The whole thing started when J.T. Corlear, my boss, requested my presence in his office. When I first joined the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I thought J.T. was in his 50s. But that was 15 years ago, and he doesn't look at all different. The wispy gray hair is still thinning, but not all gone, and his face still has the same number of wrinkles. The only recent change was that he started to slowly develop jowls. He also kept his thermostat 6 degrees lower than the rest of the floor, so when I entered, I pulled my white linen jacket tight around me. As I sat in the guest chair, he picked up a green file folder overstuffed with other manila file folders from his overcrowded desk. "I got a weird one for you, Liz," he said. JT always began his assignments by saying, "I got a blank one for you." Whatever adjective modifies one is generally a good barometer for how the case will go. Most tend to be odd, or simple, I like those, or confusing. Occasionally I'll get a complicated, or stupid. Once I got a silly. The worst was the one time I got gross. I was a vegetarian for 6 months after that one. I prompted, "Weird in what way?" "I got 11 murders all across the country. All's the same MO. All in the last few months. 2 of them are kind of famous. We got a best-selling novelist and a guy who writes for one of those cartoon series. But we also got," he checked through one of the papers in the file, "a librarian, a bookstore manager, a financial analyst, a lawyer, a housewife, a magazine editor, an engineer, a jeweler, and an artist." "What's the MO?" "All of them were strangled in their homes by a printer cord." "Printer cord? You mean the ribbon?" No, the cord that connects the printer to the computer." I nodded. He handed me the folder, which nearly broke my wrist when I tried to hold it with one hand. "Those," JT said, "are all the police reports. Take a look at them, let me know what you think." I got up, hefting the folders. I spent the rest of the day reading through police reports from all over. 3 from New York, 3 from the Los Angeles area, 2 from Eugene, wherever the hell that was, Oregon, according to the file, and the rest from places in Maryland, Iowa, and Pennsylvania. The novelist was a guy named William Radcliffe, wrote books about elves or something. I remembered seeing a story on his death on headline news while flipping channels between innings of an Oriole game. As for the other guy JT said was kinda famous, not only had I never heard of him, I had never heard of the cartoon he had won an Emmy for. But I don't watch much television unless there's baseball on. I kept thinking there had to be some literary angle, what with the two professional writers, an editor, a bookstore manager, and a librarian. Then again, they were geographically pretty far removed, and that didn't explain the lawyer, financial analyst, etc. An odd thing, in no case was there a sign of forced entry. Whoever did this knew the victims, or faked knowing them real well. It looked like the victims all let their killer into their home. JT assigned me a team. I sent people out to New York, LA, Iowa, Pennsylvania, and God help us, Eugene, to talk to families, neighbors, etc., to look for some link among the murders that the local cops who weren't looking for such a connection wouldn't have seen. I took the local one from Gaithersburg, Maryland, a Washington, D.C. suburb, myself. This was the engineer, a woman named Julie Lee. Born Julie Park, this 30-year-old MIT graduate was married, no kids, living in a nice house that set my teeth on edge when I arrived at 7 p.m. the following day. I hate suburbia. Should have sent Joan. She loves this idyllic stuff. But that's why I sent her to deal with the artist from Iowa. Her husband answered the door, a short Korean-American man with dark hair, Harold Lee, if the mailbox was to be believed. He wore a t-shirt with fresh creases on it, so he probably just changed into it after coming home from work. Mr. Lee, my name is Special Agent Elizabeth Cooper. I held my badge up long enough for him to get a good look at it, then continued. Can I come in, please? I need to ask you a few questions about your wife. Thankfully, he didn't wince, or get defensive, or do any of the other things bereaved spouses tended to do when this subject came up, but simply looked resigned, nodded, and opened the door all the way. The house was typically suburban. Living room, staircase, hallway, kitchen, all the usual accoutrements. It was kept very neat, which spoke well of the Lees or of their housekeeper. Can I get you something to drink, Miss Cooper? A glass of ice water would be nice. Lee nodded and went to the kitchen, which had a counter that served as a window between the kitchen and the living room. Fetching a jug of water from the refrigerator, he said, I'm a little confused, Miss Cooper. Why is the FBI involved in this? There's a possibility that your wife's death is connected to several other deaths around the country. Really? Lee brought a glass of water into the living room and handed it to me. Thank you. Several people have been recently killed in the same manner as your wife, Mr. Lee. That's terrible. His mouth twitched. He seemed to be fighting his revulsion. I asked him all the usual questions, some of which the local cops had probably already asked, all of which had boring, normal, routine answers of no use whatsoever. I found out that Harold Lee was a translator for the Korean consulate and met Julie Park when she moved down here after graduating MIT. Frustrated, though not surprised at this lack of useful information, I played a hunch. Was your wife an avid reader, Mr. Lee? He actually smiled at that. A pleasant smile seemed to brighten his entire face. Avid doesn't begin to describe it. The attic was Julie's library. There were over 1,000 books up there. She did a little writing, book reviews for a local magazine, that kind of thing. She even got a short story published. Do you know where? She shook her head. He shook his head. Afraid not. I don't read much outside the job, and what I do read for fun is usually in Korean. Just more comfortable with it. It was in a book, though, a collection of short stories. I asked a couple more questions, thanked him again for the water, and took my leave. The rest of the gang called in with variations on nothing new here, and they all flew back and turned in their reports. It was Johansson's report from Eugene that got the gears turning. Both victims, a librarian named Martine Alphonse and a bookstore manager named Jack Martin, knew each other. They were part of a local writers group called the Square Pegs, and had written a short story together under the cute pseudonym Martin Martine. They'd also published a few stories separately. According to Alphonse's roommate, they were collaborating on a novel, which Martin's wife confirmed. They apparently wrote the same kind of stuff that William Radcliffe wrote. Oddly, they were killed about a month apart. They both had stories in a new anthology. I turned to the Iowa artist, Elizabeth Eakins. According to Jones, she was getting into writing as well, having just sold 2 short stories, one to a magazine, one to an anthology, for which she also provided the cover. Then I went to Stewart's report from New York. Sure enough, the lawyer, the magazine editor, and the financial analyst all had writing careers of some sort. The financial analyst, a woman named Rachel Klein, had published several science fiction novels and short stories, one of which won an award. According to Stewart, the award was still prominently displayed in the apartment she had shared with her daughter. Bob McElroy, the magazine editor, worked for a trade journal where one of his duties was to edit the science fiction book review column, and he just sold his third story somewhere, but his coworkers couldn't remember where, and his family didn't even know he wrote. The lawyer, Miriam Burry, used to write, but had come out of retirement, according to her boyfriend, to contribute to an anthology called Cyberminds. Finally, a title. Markowitz, I bellowed to our office coordinator, which meant he did all the scut work no one else wanted to do. Fred Markowitz was in his first year with the Bureau and gave the impression he wouldn't make it to his second. Yo, he said with his usual dearth of enthusiasm. Go to that bookstore down the street and pick up a book called Cyberminds. Should be in the science fiction section. It's a collection of short stories by different people, so it'll be under anthologies. What if they don't have it? I sighed. Then go to another bookstore. What if they don't have it? While I admired Markowitz's desire to plan for all possible occurrences, he was getting on my nerves. Markowitz, we're in Washington, D.C., one of the biggest metropolises on the East Coast. Somewhere in this city is a bookstore with this book in it. How am I going to know it when I see it? Well, the word Cyberminds on the cover should be your first clue. Then check the table of contents. Make sure one of the authors is named Miriam Burry. Markowitz rolled his eyes and shuffled out the door. It took him 3 hours, but he finally returned with a copy. The guy at the store said he only ordered 2 copies, and this is the first one that's sold, he said as he handed me the book. The cover was hideous, all dark and foreboding, dominated by a computer screen with a malevolent face on it. Subtitled Tales of Artificial Intelligence, it was edited by Kevin De Zuniga and featured all new stories from William Radcliffe, Rachel Klein, Christopher Wolfe, and many more. Christopher Wolfe was the animation writer. I quickly flipped to the table of contents. They were all there. Martine Alphonse, Christopher Wolfe, Miriam Burry, William Radcliffe, Rachel Klein, R. McElroy, Nora Janet Zimmerman, Julie P. Lee, Jack Martin, Lisbeth Eakins, Preston G. Alewife, and B.J. Levine. Cover by Lisbeth Eakins. I frowned. I double-checked the file. I yelled, Stewart, Jones, Johansson! They whipped their heads around in surprise. What? Jones asked urgently. B.J. Levine, author, contributed to this book. I tossed the paperback across 2 desks toward Johansson, who caught it unerringly. Find this person, I don't care how you do it. Well, who is he? Stewart asked. He or she is one of 2 things. Could be the next and last target of our printer cord killer. What's the other thing? The printer cord killer. Someone's picking off everyone who contributed to this book. Johansson stared at the cover. God, this is ugly. Jones went to Johansson's desk and looked at it. Geez, that's Eakins' work. I saw the original at her place in Iowa. Contact the publisher, I said. They should have files on all these people. Johansson added, oh, what about this editor guy, De Zuniga? He might be a target, too. Or the killer, Stewart said. I thought of him. Johansson, get in touch with the publisher. I want a location on both De Zuniga and Levine. Got it. The publisher, Stellar Books, was an imprint of a large multinational corporation that had just merged with another large multinational corporation the previous week. They were located in Midtown Manhattan, and according to Johansson, weren't allowed to release information on authors over the phone unless they had proof that we were really the FBI conducting a murder investigation. Johansson stinks at this sort of thing. I called them back and got a prissy-sounding secretary's type. Stellar Books, she said. This is Susan. My name is Special Agent Elizabeth Cooper. I'm conducting a murder investigation for the FBI. Gee, there must be a lot of you going around. I'm Agent Johansson's supervisor. He just told me that some bullshit story about how the people at Stellar Books are completely uninterested in assisting in a murder investigation, are obstructing justice, and are making us very suspicious of their reasons for doing so, since they are the most obvious connection linking a series of grisly murders. I said to Agent Johansson, this is ridiculous! The people at Stellar Books would never do something so unutterably stupid as be completely uninterested in assisting in a murder investigation, obstructing justice, and make us very suspicious of their reasons for doing so precisely because they are the most obvious connection linking a series of rather grisly murders. Let me call them back. Now then, I, as a duly authorized representative of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, do humbly request that you release to me the address and phone number of Kevin De Zuniga and B.J. Levine. If you do not do so, I will go through the hassle of flying to New York, obtaining a warrant to search the premises of your office, and getting the information, as well as the equal hassle of having you arrested for obstruction of justice. She gave me the address and phone number of Kevin De Zuniga in New Jersey and Bethany J. Levine right here in D.C. She even gave me De Zuniga's fax number and Levine's email address. I thanked her kindly and hung up. Johansson fixed me with a bemused look. I shrugged and said, you have to know how to reason with these people. Johansson called Levine's number and got no answer. I tried De Zuniga and got his answering machine. I left an urgent message and told him to call me immediately. I decided to call Levine myself, swearing never to let Johansson call anyone ever again. "What?" came a frantic voice. May I speak to Bethany Levine, please?" "Oh, God!" The voice was nearly screaming, and I couldn't place a gender yet. "My name is Special Agent Cooper of the FBI. It's urgent that I speak to Bethany Levine." "Well, you're gonna need a goddamn fucking psychic, Special Agent Hooper of the FBI, because the little bitch is dead." The voice was male. I figured this out around the time he hung up the phone on me. Great. I led a team to the Levine residence, an apartment building in the northwest part of town. We showed up only a few minutes after the city cops, which shocked the hell out of the sergeant, a short Latino gentleman with sharply receding hair, a thick mustache, and a cigarette dangling from his mouth. "What the fuck are the Fibbies doing here?" he asked. "Fibbies? That's cute." I said, "My name's Cooper." I flashed my ID. "I'm Sergeant Velez. Now that we're all nice and introduced, why don't you answer my fucking question? Would I be right in assuming that the victim is one Bethany J. Levine, that she was strangled by the cord connecting her printer to her computer, and that her body was found by her estranged boyfriend?" Velez's cigarette fell out of his mouth. I picked it up and handed it to him with a smile. "Jesus fucking Christ, lady, you some kind of fucking psychic?" He grabbed the cigarette out of my hand, placed it in his mouth, realized it had been on the floor, and stuffed it out. "No, just trying to follow a pattern." "Pattern? Jesus, don't tell me this is part of some fucking serial bullshit." "Alright, I won't tell you. Where's the boyfriend?" "In the next room. You can't talk to him yet." I scowled. "Why not?" "Because he's giving us his fucking statement. That's why you can't fucking talk to him, okay? Let me get my statement and take my fingerprints and do all the other shit I gotta do that's gonna get ignored, because you fucking Fibbies are gonna step all over my investigation and pull jurisdictional bullshit on me. That's why, okay?" I shrugged. "Fine. Let me know when you're done with them." "Keep your fucking feds out of my people's fucking faces, okay?" I repeated, "Fine." Eventually, I got to talk to the boyfriend, named Scott O'Sullivan. He was even more obnoxious than he had been on the phone, and competed with Velez for gold medal in most uses of the word fucking in a conversation. He had come to the apartment to try to make up with Beth, with whom he'd had a fight. He found her dead on the love seat, strangled with a printer cord. When Johansson had called, he was calling the police, and for obvious reasons, ignored the call waiting beep. Jones was pocketing her cellular as she came up to me, after I finished with O'Sullivan. "Just got a call from Markowitz. That DeCandido guy called back. Said he's scared shitless. Someone's been making threats on his life. Local cops won't listen when he says he needs protection." I let out a breath. "Get back to the office and get in touch with his local cops. I want to round the clock on this guy. Have Markowitz get us a flight up to Newark tonight. I want you and Stewart with me." "Got it." Back at the office, I had Johansson run a check on every employee of Stellar Books to find out what he or she had been doing for the past 4 months. Then Stewart, Jones, and I flew to Newark, where a company car waited for us. We hightailed it up the New Jersey Turnpike and across to the editor's West Orange house, where several cops waited for us. I had a bad feeling about this. In my experience, suburban cops were usually good for escorting undesirables out of the neighborhood, stopping speeding cars, and a little else. DeCandido, a short, bearded, bald man in near constant motion, refused to leave the house, which made it easier to protect him. He was completely unhelpful regarding who might be responsible for the murders. "You must understand, Agent Copper," he said. This was his third variation on my last name since my arrival the night before. "I'm one of the most respected individuals in my chosen field. When readers see my name on a book, they know it's a quality anthology. When authors hear I am soliciting stories for a book, they flock because they know it will be a project worthy of their talents. I can't imagine anyone who would want to kill everyone involved with an anthology that I edited. It's simply inconceivable." I had checked his spacious home over fairly thoroughly, including an entire room full of books he was involved in, often several copies of each, and different editions of the same book. He'd obviously been doing this for some time. "The books in that back room," I said, "are they arranged chronologically?" "Yes, why?" he asked, getting up after having sat down for a full 10 seconds. "I noticed all the most recent books are from Stellar." "Yes, I signed an exclusive deal with Stellar to edit 6 anthologies for them. Cyberminds was the last. They'll probably be glad it was, given the circumstances when this gets out." "Is there anyone at Stellar who might be responsible?" "I doubt it. You must understand, Agent Hooper, I hardly worked with anyone there. I mean, I spoke often with Peter Blake, the publisher, and that assistant fellow who did all my office coordinating, but that's it. I did most of the work out of my home office here." Another night passed, and nothing happened. Johansson called in to say that the checks on Stellar employees turned up negative. Only 2 of them were out of town during any of the murders, and they weren't anywhere near the murder victims. In the morning, I went to New York to talk with the good people at Stellar Books. I forgot what a nightmare driving is in Midtown Manhattan. I cruised for a parking spot, eventually putting the car in an overpriced garage and walking to 6th in a foul mood. When I'm in a foul mood, I tend to analyze things. But this case defied analysis. Or maybe I was in too foul a mood. I wasn't even sure why I was checking into Stellar personally, since they were all clean. Then again, maybe somebody there wanted all the contributors killed as a way of drumming up sales. They'd invested a lot of money in the book. Nah, that didn't wash. For one thing, if no one there did it, they would have had to have hired someone, and these hits were not professional. A pro wouldn't leave so obvious a link among the victims. Besides, this was the final book in a 6-book contract. I could see going to the effort if it was the first and sales stunk, but why bother when there wouldn't be any more books anyhow? Still, it couldn't hurt to check them out personally, and the alternative of spending the day with Mr. Hyperactive didn't appeal. It's possible DeCandido was the killer, but he seemed legitimately spooked by the whole thing, unless it was an act. Well, if any evidence to support that cropped up, he'd be easy to arrest. Peter Blake, publisher of Stellar Books, interrupted a meeting to talk to me, which was the least he could do, or so he said. I must admit, Agent Cooper, I am very distressed by this whole business. I had no idea our authors were being murdered. This sort of thing, it's just appalling. Mr. Blake, did any of your employees have a reason to want these authors dead? Not really. Did any of them hold a grudge against Mr. DeCandido, and perhaps use this as a way to get back at him? I doubt it. I was the only person who dealt directly with him. Well, the book's publicity rep might have spoken to him once or twice, but that's it. Something clicked. Wait, Mr. DeCandido said the only people he dealt with here were you and an assistant who did his office coordinating. Oh, yes, well, Tony did deal with him quite a bit. At my questioning stare, he added, Anthony Pascazzi. He was an associate editor here for a couple of years. Not anymore? No, he resigned about 3 or 4 months ago. Said the pressure was too much. A pity. He was a decent editor, had a lot of potential. I asked Blake a few more pointless questions, then went to his secretary, Susan McElhatton, the one I'd intimidated 2 days earlier. Can you give me anything on a former employee named Anthony Pascazzi? When did he stop working here? 4 months ago or so. Well, I've only been here a few weeks. Patricia could help you. She's been here forever. I found Patricia Goldblum, the office manager, on the phone. After several minutes, she got off and snappishly asked, Yes? Ms. Goldblum, I'm Special Agent Cooper of the FBI. I'm investigating. Yes, I know who you are. What is it? I'm busy. After the eager-to-please Peter Blake, this was like ice water in the face. It's a murder investigation, Ms. Goldblum. I need to find a former employee of this company, an associate editor named Anthony Pascazzi. That's privileged information, Agent Cooper, and even if it wasn't, I'm far too busy. I already went through this with Ms. McElhatton. Now, I can go to the trouble of obtaining a court order to search the premises and have you arrested for obstruction of justice. It's up to you to decide which one will take less of your precious time. I don't like your tone, Agent Cooper, and I don't appreciate being bullied. How would your superiors feel if I told them you engage in such tactics? You're welcome to report me, Ms. Goldblum, though I suspect that would take even more of that time you're trying so hard to keep a rein on, since you'll be asked to fly to Washington to testify at my disciplinary hearing. I ran my hand through my curly blonde hair. I'm trying to catch a serial killer, Ms. Goldblum. That's the kind of thing that strains my politeness muscles. Now, will you give me a way of getting in touch with Anthony Pascazzi or not? She gave me a way. She even let me use one of the office phones to try calling him. Unfortunately, the number had been disconnected. This didn't encourage me. He also had an email address. When I got back to DeCandido's, I called the guy in our office who patrols the various computer networks. I identified the online service Pascazzi used and asked if his email address rang any bells. Let me check. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. Okay, this guy's pretty active on the Skiffy BB. The what? The science fiction board. But he hasn't been on much the last few months. He wouldn't be if he was traveling across the country killing people. Stewart and Jones went to Pascazzi's last known address to find it occupied by 2 men who'd been living there for 4 months. They didn't know who had it last, though one complained that whoever he was, he didn't do anything about the roach problem. I was about to have them check hotels when one of the West Orange cops told me a light blue Pinto with New York plates had been parked near the house several times for an hour or so at a time each of the last couple of days. No one had seen anyone get in or out. He even copied down the license plate number. He added, I wouldn't have thought much about it, ma'am, except we don't get a lot of Pintos around here. I pointed out that no one does. There's few of that brand of Ford around these days, and commended him on his observation. That'll teach me to stereotype suburban cops. The license plate went with a car reported as stolen by the NYPD, the one piece of property belonging to Robert McElroy that was missing when he was found murdered. Sure enough, it turned up the next day, but only for a moment. I couldn't get a good look at the driver. West Orange doesn't get enough traffic for me to stay close without him noticing. When he drove off, I followed, Stewart and Jones in the car with me. He led us to a condo complex, finally settling in one of the houses, identical to all the other houses in the row, toward the rear of the complex. When we burst in, A 5'8" man in his 20s with longish brown hair, wearing wire-rimmed glasses, laughed and said, "It's about fucking time you people showed up." I straightened. "Excuse me? My next step was going to be a neon sign on the car that said, 'Hey, the killer's in here!'" "You wanted us to catch you." He laughed again. "Of course I did. Christ, why do you think I left so obvious a trail? Not that it went right. I was expecting a huge media event. Printer cord killer strikes again. Next Cyberminds author lives in fear of being next victim. Instead, I got jack shit." Stewart frowned. "Next author?" Pascazzi rolled his eyes. "Christ fucking mighty, you didn't even get that, did you?" At our quizzical glances, he said, "I killed them in the order their stories appeared in the anthology." I frowned. That's why Alphonse and Martine were killed so far apart, despite both living in Eugene, and why Levine was killed last. Figures. Once again, I worked my ass off to accomplish something, and no one notices. "Is that what this is all about?" I asked. "Getting noticed?" "Not just noticed, recognized. Jesus, you think D. Zuniga's responsible for those books? All he did was call Bill Radcliffe and ask him to send in a story. I was the one who got Chris Wolfe and Rachel Klein. I was the one who got Miriam Burry out of retirement to write a story for the book. I tracked all the others down. I rejected the stories that sucked worms, including every single one Kevin goddamn D. Zuniga sent me from one of his idiot friends with a note saying, 'Is this any good? Let me know.' I line edited. I pitched the book at sales conference. I made sure publicity sent review copies to all the right places. I did all of that. And for all this, all I got was my name in with 4 other people in the special thanks to part of the book, and the only reason I got that was because I did the special thanks to part, just like I did every other fucking thing in that goddamn book." So what happens? All the reviews say Kevin D. Zuniga this, and Kevin D. Zuniga that, and isn't Kevin D. Zuniga a genius? And another winner from Kevin D. Zuniga. This is his best book in years, and it's all because of me! Pascazzi gesticulated madly throughout his diatribe. He finally put his arms down, and I slapped the handcuffs on. "Read him his rights, Jones." I walked out of the house, which I later found out belonged to a colleague of Pascazzi's who was letting him house sit until he found a new place in New York, and who was unaware of his friend's criminality. And sighed. Here I was trying to ascribe a financial motive, or a lunatic motive, and it was just a guy who wanted credit where it was due. A little more investigation revealed Tony Pascazzi had done a lot of traveling in the 4 months since he left Stellar, and it all matched up with the murders. He drained his savings account, but he was obviously a man with a mission. He had no trouble gaining ingress, since all he had to do was knock on the door saying, "Hi, I'm your editor on Cyberminds. I was in town, thought I'd drop by," and he was in. Jones mused at one point what he would have done if one of them worked on a typewriter. The case was a jurisdictional nightmare, but ultimately was tried in New York, since Pascazzi was still officially a New York City resident, as were 3 of the victims. The best moment of the trial was when D. Zuniga testified and almost got Pascazzi acquitted. We tried to puzzle out what the assistant district attorney was thinking, letting D. Zuniga anywhere near the stand, since he was such a pathetic witness. He carried on about how he knew Pascazzi was trouble from the moment he was assigned to coordinate Cyberminds, and how he knew something was wrong with him, and he encouraged Blake to have him fired, though he resigned instead. When Pascazzi's lawyer ripped into him, I almost smiled. As a hostile witness, D. Zuniga buckled, admitting that yes, Pascazzi did much of the work, and no, he didn't really try to get him fired. No, D. Zuniga, in fact, couldn't remember his name half the time, and no, Pascazzi didn't get much credit, but that's just the way the industry worked. By the time the lawyer was finished, the jury was almost ready to strangle D. Zuniga with the printer cord themselves. After that, though, things went as expected. Once the show was over, the piles of physical evidence against Pascazzi pretty much did the trick. Indeed, the only surprise was that he pleaded not guilty. When Stewart and Jones commented on his plea, I replied, "This whole thing was orchestrated to get him recognized for what he did, and even that failed. So he pleads not guilty. He gets a trial that the entire publishing industry and everyone who watches court TV will know and talk about. He finally got his credit." JT was right. This was a weird one. The fact that I wrote this story while I was a junior editor in the publishing business who did a lot of work for only a credit that was in the special thanks to section of the book is a total coincidence. Absolutely. Anyhow, thank you very much for watching and listening, and please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Check me out online. DeCandido.net is my website. DeCandido.wordpress.com is my blog. Patreon.com/KRAD is my Patreon. The Patreon has lots and lots of nifty content on it that is definitely worth supporting and is very cheap. And please do stay safe. Thank you.